Alright, so let's talk about strings now. First of all, what are strings? Well, strings are a special class that holds a series of characters in them. Remember that the char type is any single character, like a letter or number or symbol. Well, the string is a series of those characters, and remember, characters are wrapped in single quotes. To denote a string, you'd wrap it in double quotes. So if you have a one character long string, as long as it's wrapped in double quotes, it is still a string. You can also have a zero character long string, an empty string, or you can have strings as big as you want. And some examples of strings we've got down here are like hello world wrapped in double quotes, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is especially important that it's wrapped in double quotes. Otherwise, it would be an int because that is just a number unless you add those quotes around it. So how do we create strings in Java? Well, you create strings like any other class type that you would make or any other primitive type that you know of. We say the type and then name and then equals some value. So the type again is string with a capital S, which is important. The name, we can call this my string here, and then say equals, and then whatever string you want here, like hello world. Another way to implement a string, to initialize a string, is again you say string my string, and then instead of just directly saying the string that you want after the equal sign, you would say equals new string, and then in parentheses, in quotes, this string that you want. Now the second way, we actually have seen something similar to this before with your constructor from main when we construct a new object of a class. So for example, in the very first project that I went through, we made a class called hello world, and then we said new hello world to start the program running. Well, this is another way to construct a string, is with the constructor via the new keyword and then string, and then in this case the constructor takes an argument hello world. But generally you want to go with this first way of creating strings because it is a little bit more optimized and it's also just simpler, I think. It's much more like what we're used to with other variables. So what can we do with strings? We can actually do a lot of stuff with strings. Strings are really amazing, but first of all, probably most importantly, you can print them out. You can do system.out.println. Remember that sysout shortcut of writing system.out.println, at least for Eclipse. And then you just, in parentheses, you can just put that string, the variable name of the string that you have. You can also concatenate or add together strings, like string 3 equals string 1 plus string 2, and that's just going to smash the two strings together. So if string 1 contained the string hello and string 2 contained world, then string 3 would end up being hello world. Simple as that. You can also get a single character from a string. So in this case, we have my string over here. This is our string right here. We say dot char at, and then in parentheses, we do the index of the string that we want to get that character. And the reason I'm storing it in a char called second char, when the number over here, this index, is 1, is because indexes are a little bit weird in programming. Most programming languages, anyway. Like in Java, indexes start at 0. So when we talk about arrays in a little bit, indexes will also start at 0. But in strings, the very first character of a string is actually the 0th character. It's index 0. And the second character is index 1. So like the last character is the length of the string minus 1, because we got to do that offset because the indexing is kind of weird like that. Another thing that you can do with strings is you can see if two strings are equal. So we can have, like in this example, we have string 1 dot equals string 2. You can also just do string 1 dot equals and then, in quotes, a direct string like that. But the reason that we can't use the double equals operator for strings like this is because strings are classes, and the double equals operator operates a little bit differently for classes than it does for primitive types. So the double equals is perfectly fine for primitive types. In fact, you can't use the dot equals for primitive types, like int or boolean or char. But for string, the dot equals or the double equals will sometimes work, but not all the time, and that's why you should generally just always use the dot equals um, function or method for comparing if two strings are equal. And we'll go over some examples of this in actual code in Eclipse a little bit later. But you can do so much more with strings, and really just like, if you can get to this link by just looking up Java string, it's like the first link that pops up, and it's got all the documentation on all the crazy functions that you can do with strings, which are super useful. And you might be asking, okay, well, why would I even care about all these crazy things I can do with strings? Well, string manipulation is super useful in the real world and in your Java class, from parsing data from files or writing to files, also handling user input and outputting to the user. And also for you, string manipulation is going to be super important for practical exams and the practical tests, where you'll probably have a lot of questions related to manipulating strings. So make sure you know some of the basic concepts with strings and some of the special functions that you can use. So a question that you might be asking is, why is string capitalized? Well, that's because, as we said before, string is a class, and it's not a primitive type, like int and char and float, which are all lowercase. And classes are usually capitalized. All classes that Java implements for you, like string, and there's also like scanner is probably one that you've seen before, are going to be capitalized, and you should probably get in the habit of capitalizing your classes as well. If you want to know what classes are right now, we'll learn about it in a little bit, but generally classes are a place that you can store a lot of related variables and functions, and they're actually called fields and methods when you're talking about a class. And you've actually already used classes with whatever main class that you create from your main method when you say new hello world or new binary translator. That, again, that was called the constructor that you're calling to make a object of that class. And the string class has a lot of different functions. So since classes are a place where you can store a lot of variables and functions, the string class has all these different functions that you can use, like the dot equals function, and so much more of the stuff that you can see online in documentation, which is going to be pretty important to learn some of those common ones for your practicals. And this is actually all we have for the slides. So real quick, I wanted to go into a bit of code here. So I got a simple little project here. From our main, we created this new class called strings. Again, and then in the constructor, we write all of our code for this strings class. So up here at the top, we have the two ways to create a string. You can create a string literal with the quotes right here, or you can make it as an object with the new string. Remember, you probably want to use this first method of creating strings. We can also concatenate strings just like this. So we make a new string, call it string C, and we're just adding string A plus string B. And that's simple as that, and it should equal hello, comma, space, world, exclamation mark. And then we're just going to print out what string C equals here. And then if it does equal hello world, which it should, we'll print out another line to say string C equals hello world. And we can give this a little run. And yep, just like that, string C equals hello world here, and then it does print out that it is equal to hello world. And one quick thing, you might have noticed that I had to use single quotes here for hello world instead of using double quotes, because if we use double quotes, just like that, Java gets a little bit mad at us, because what's happening here is this first quote finds its match with this second quote, and then this becomes a string right here, string C equals, and then the hello world here is actually being parsed as real like code instead of being a string, and then these two quotes over here are considered another string. This would be just an empty string right here. So the way you want to get the actual double quote character into a string, since the double quotes is what signifies the start and end of a string, we can use the backslash for that. So if we say backslash quote and then backslash quote over here, now this means the literal quote character, and this right here means the literal quote character. And then these two quotes on the outside are just denoting the start and end of the string. So if we run this code here, now we can see we got those double quotes in our console down here. Yeah, but the backslash character is super useful for getting certain characters that you can't really type out. Like you can do backslash T for the tab character, or backslash N for an enter. You can also do backslash backslash to get an actual backslash character, so a lot of good stuff like that. But that is about it for strings. Remember to play around with strings if you can, and look up documentation. Really get used to strings for those practical tests.